Joining me now in the studio is Fabrizio Carboni. He is the ICRC Regional Director for Near and Middle East. Fabrizio, welcome to Al Jazeera. Thanks very much for coming in. We'll get into each individual country in just a second, but first, more generally, as I just said, the region, Middle East region, has long been afflicted by conflicts and all these other issues. Tell us more about the difficulties that the region faces and the challenges that you have to deal with.
I mean, before speaking about the challenges, I believe we need to acknowledge that over the last 2-3 years, there is diplomatic efforts to try to address the crisis in the region through diplomatic means. And I think we need to acknowledge that we're not where we were 4 or 5 years ago with this big battles and massive confrontation. So there is this genuine effort. We see it in Yemen. We see it also in Syria.
There's an effort, but is there progress?
I think, to reach a political solution, you need to build trust. You need to build confidence, because at one stage you need to compromise. And if we look back to what happened over the last 12 years, 13 years, I think we need to look with a positive attitude the efforts which are taking place today. But as you said, we still need to demonstrate for the people of this region that there are positive dividends for them. And that's probably where we are a bit concerned, because if we look at the people of the region, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Palestine, the situation is really dire.
Right, and for many it's hard to see any positivity at all. Especially, you talk about Syria. I mean, you went there shortly after the earthquake, I think. You had years of conflict and then the earthquake. What kind of things did you see, and what was your takeaway from it?
What is hard in Syria, and especially the area affected by the earthquake, it's actually, for instance, Aleppo, it's the area which was also the hardest hit by the conflict. So you had people who had to struggle living in the rubbles of the city, and on top of this, they had to manage the earthquake. But what stays with me I was there just 2 days after the earthquake, though the people of this region, the people of Aleppo, they were the first one to respond to the crisis, because they were pretty much left alone with the situation. So as ICRC, we intervened quite quickly within, the same night with the Syria Arab Red Crescent. But at the end of the day, the size of the challenge, the size of the devastation, was such that we couldn't compensate, we couldn't cope with the size of the challenge. The people had to take the situation in their own hand. It was sad and a bit frustrating, to be honest.
And in Syria and in other regions like Yemen, the problems, the issues are made worse by the fact that they're deeply politicized, especially Yemen.
That's the thing, I believe solution will come through a political process. And humanitarian action is just buying time, allowing people to cope with the situation till there is a real solution, which is a political solution. And what we face over the last year is that the lack of political process or the lack of political progress actually affected humanitarian action, because when you don't have political progress, you use humanitarian action. And that's why often humanitarian action was and is politicized. And who's paying the price? Obviously, the people of Syria, the people of Palestine, the people of Yemen, the people of Iraq.
As we come to the end, a big issue as well, of course, is funding. Yep. Money is what's required, and that has dwindled.
Yeah, I think the situation, it's overwhelming, because there's the climate crisis, the consequence of the conflict, and we see that funding is decreasing. So obviously we want our traditional donors to do more, but we also need other actors to come in. I think we need the burden needs to be shared by way more actors than the one who pay for humanitarian action over the last 10, 12 years.
And what about all the other issues? We've talked about conflict specifically, but climate change, the effects of COVID and so forth.
I think this is a cumulative effect, and I think the climate change is probably the one causing very big concern for us, because you can't separate anymore conflict from, I would say, a climate crisis. Mm-hmm. And on top of this, what we see is that you need resources to address the climate crisis. I mean, the drought in Yemen with following floods, you need to address this with climate money. And we see that all the money for addressing the challenge of the climate crisis is not going towards the countries which are most affected and which often are the ones facing situation of conflict and violence. So it's a really vicious circle.
Of course, and the thing with climate change, it's not just an environmental issue. It's also, and more importantly for the millions concerned, it's an economic problem, isn't it?
It's public health, because you don't have water. It's economy, because obviously if your harvest is affected, you cannot grow what is needed for food, but also to kickstart the economy. So you can't isolate the climate crisis from all the aspects of life. And that's what makes it very urgent, not just for humanitarian actors, but for the whole international community observing those situations of conflict and instability, to be serious about it and to channel the necessary funding and technology towards those areas affected by conflict. It's not happening today. Absolutely not. And there is really a need to change perspective.
What's your message to the international community in your effort here to try and help these nations recover from the issues that they face?
I think what allows the region to be a bit more peaceful than what we had 4 or 5 years ago, it's because we mainly address the security agenda. But there are structural causes, structural issues causing this situation of instability. It's access to education, it's access to health, it's, in summary, to know that tomorrow will be better than today. And while the security agenda is important, if we don't pay attention to the other root causes of violence, the risk is to have, again, more instability. And there, I think mainly about the millions of people who are still displaced, thinking about the people who are still detained, thinking about the thousands of people who went missing and their families staying without news, creating a level of anxiety which, in our view, will make the transition towards a more stable and peaceful region more difficult.
Fabrizio Carboni, the ICRC Regional Director for Near and Middle East, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.